going on with the Bob Lutz Tesla destroyed plan. This secret plan had a few different elements which we wanted to review, and then we want to move on to the fact that instead of the plan going as developed by Bob Lutz and other auto executives, it's actually going the complete opposite direction, with the major executives at many auto companies choosing to quit or get fired as a result. So that's our show for today. Welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. So please note, your subscription has a huge impact. We'd appreciate it if you'd do so. Also wanted to note we could use your support on Patreon. Very impactful and a huge difference maker as well in terms of growth and development of this channel. We cover a lot of things when it comes to EVs and directionally, etc. But in sort of a secret way, Tesla has been to some extent destroying the auto industry. So let's take a look at 2 or 3 cases that are pretty interesting. The first is Dieselgate. So if you'll all recall, the European countries in particular have been focused on the fact that there are emissions issues and they wanted those reduced. One of the ways that many German companies chose to address this was in the Dieselgate case, where they simply fabricated numbers for clean diesel, and once that was found out, it cost them a huge amount of money. But that activity, even though it was probably $15 billion in costs, represented a response to Tesla in that theoretically emissions were being reduced, but they weren't. So this is one example of how Tesla's sort of destroying the auto industry. When it comes to Bob Lutz, he explained that one of the strategy techniques that he had in mind was that they would develop an EV and then they would start selling those EVs below market. So for example, that technique is still the case. In the case of the Chevy Bolt, it's being sold for $10,000 below cost. And then when you add in the EV credits, the whole idea was the combination would actually potentially destroy Tesla, simply because they couldn't compete at the price point that you would net out. And consumers really haven't responded to that in an appropriate fashion. Namely, it's easy to analyze that the Model 3 and Tesla in general outsells the Bolt by Chevy, 10, 20 to 1, and the numbers just keep getting worse for GM. So we thought it was kind of interesting that, bottom line is that the folks at GM, i.e. Bob Lutz, sort of calculated different ways in which they could handle Tesla, eliminate the threat of EVs to their core ICE business, and keep moving on. And there's another example of how this has not quite worked out as planned, hoped by the larger auto industry. The third sort of analysis of this is that what was supposed to happen based on the process developed by the major autos was that they would take billions, $5, $10, $20 billion that they have available on their balance sheet and simply put it into R&D and eliminate the Tesla threat within a 3 to 5 year period. And when you look at the Model S, we're now 10 years in, and that threat still has not been addressed effectively by competing major auto firms. The reason why we analyze this as being Tesla destroying the auto industry is the fact that in the case of VW, BMW, and Mercedes, all of the CEOs of those companies have elected to either retire or get fired as a way to deal with the threat of both EVs, i.e. Tesla, as well as addressing the threat of In this case, Dieselgate was a big part of that. It didn't work out. So hence the name of our show, which is Tesla Destroys the Plans of the Major EV Manufacturers. I'm kind of shifting orientation because of the darkness and impact of the sunlight, even though we were trying to pick up the clouds that you can see behind me. So the industry reaction really has not worked out on behalf of the major autos. And it's interesting to watch them cycle into what the new answer is going to be. So, and we'll sort of dive into that in a moment here. But I further wanted to look at the fact that in the case of all of the European manufacturers, they systematically have replaced their CEOs. Ford, perhaps to its credit, has replaced its CEO with someone who's focused on autonomous, although I believe that the Ford process that's afoot will likely put the company in bankruptcy, basically because if you get rid of cars, even though they're losing money for you right now, what happens when oil prices rise again and people want fuel efficiency that you can't provide them? Plus, once you have a relationship on the car side, you can grow that into trucks and other things. But in general, I just believe that the decisions made by the folks at Ford, I think, are going to be proven to be a nightmare going forward. But there are a lot of people to benefit on those jobs that I hope can stay in business. So the next so basically what's happening right now is, for example, GM hasn't lost their CEO, and Fiat's CEO died. He struggled with how to deal with Tesla, but we talked about the fact that they have gone forward in pooling so that as the emissions changes hit in Europe, that pooling process will allow Fiat to benefit from Tesla. So I don't know the management structure as well when we look what's happening in Korea, but you kind of get the drift here that Tesla has basically forced a shift in where the entire auto industry is going, and it's cost several people their jobs in the process. So we thought this was kind of interesting because the way Bob Lutz put it, Tesla had a certain number of years before they'd be going out of business. And it's interesting to watch how the industry had a process for how to get this to happen, namely, Lutz's analysis of sort of how to get them out of business by underpricing them, and therefore consumers would roll away from Tesla vehicles, and therefore the auto business would work as it's worked for the last 100 years. And the fact of the matter is, basically, none of the normal process has worked out. There's a famous military comment that says that most wars going forward are fought with the techniques of the last war. So in essence, what Bob Lutz has been describing is a number of techniques developed in the auto industry over 50 to 100 years, and then being applied to Tesla, and none of them working. So we find this pretty fascinating because, the bottom line is that we get to transition into electric vehicles with the help of Tesla leading the way with open patents and also excellent vehicles. But we also get an opportunity to sort of benefit the planet as we're traveling rather than destroying it, as has been the case in the process of the auto industry's expansion. A further explanation could be seen if you'll take a look at our show that we did on the auto industry buying up electric trams in the United States and replacing it with diesel buses and cars, and in particular Los Angeles has been choked by this phenomenon. So there's been a process by which the auto industry over time has dealt with, in this case, electric competitors moving into the space. So we in general in this show, we're trying to take time to focus on the fact that while Bob Lutz and company had decided that they were going to use olden days techniques to crush Tesla the reality is that we're having the opposite effect. So, you know, I one of the other things that's happening, and you could argue this, is that Elon Musk has maintained the fact that he's still in position, but a lot of his subordinate executives are gone. Well, what's starting to happen is many of those executives are either showing up at BMW or other competitors and being, by default, the fast-tracked leadership for the next round of leaders for those organizations, or they've ended up or they've ended up sort of in startup situations where they're now leveraging their Tesla knowledge of process into building out solutions for other manufacturers. In particular, we're kind of looking at what's happening at Rivian and some of the others. There's a sprinkling of Tesla executives now rolling on to these other companies and in essence becoming their future strategy when it comes to EV. So if you count the number of firms that have first copied Tesla's patented technology that's been made open, and then you add in the number of the executives that are being recruited away from Tesla to implement the EV strategies of large firms directly or indirectly, in essence, the Bob Lutz thesis of Tesla's destruction has completely gone the other way, in essence, destroying the entire auto industry. I believe the most famous line that I've heard in the last few years about autos and Tesla is that before he died, the CEO of Fiat Chrysler made the comment, we make electric vehicles in their 500, but we'd like to ask you not to buy them because we have to make them in order to meet our EV goals. But every one of those cars that we sell costs us $13,000. So I just thought his comment was an illustration of the paradox that's going on, where Tesla actually has profit margins on EVs, in particular because they're going back into batteries. And so it's been a very interesting dance to figure out sort of what the future is going to look like. And Bob Lutz's analysis was spot on if we were dealing with something that's easy to take on because it fits the type of problems that the auto industry has solved easily in the past. I have to admit that one of the companies we haven't talked a lot about, I mean, they obviously did the Bolt with the help of Bob Lutz and the Volt, and GM is moving on, and Bob Lutz is talking about GM doing 22 products, and those products in theory would in essence crush Tesla. The problem is that the products that GM currently has to market really aren't selling in the space very well. And so the crushing that Bob Lutz has talked about, that GM and others would put on Tesla, we know has not occurred. But it is fascinating to watch, every technique being used, including every technique in the book being used, including large amounts of dollars, loss leaders, all these tried and true techniques over time have really kind of not worked out. So as I was looking at the show, I was just fascinated because it's almost like we have to give Bob Lutz's analysis of process a little exam to see how it's working out. And the answer right now is that it's kind of cost the heads of every major company their jobs. And I think the ultimate illustration of the point will be sometime in the next 4 or 5 years, we'll start seeing the CEOs of many of these companies, or de facto CEOs, actually being ex-Tesla employees, therefore illustrating the fact that instead of Bob Lutz's thesis of Tesla being destroyed, one by a bad decision by Elon, but two because of the power of the big autos, we think actually it's going to go the other way, hence the destruction that Tesla is wreaking on on these firms or individuals. So I bring all this up because I was just fascinated by the fact that at some point we're going to see a tipping point where there's a transition from, we're already seeing the transition in terms of all those firms being forced into making changes given where the auto business is going. We were just amazed by the fact that instead of there being a Who Destroyed Tesla show that Bob Lutz has described, and the fact that Tesla has no advantages along that list, it's proven out, in fact, that the reality has become the complete opposite, where Tesla is now the de facto standard for what all the auto companies are doing, and all of them are modifying operations to embrace the core fundamentals of what Tesla is doing. I have to say that I'm a U.S. citizen, even though I was born in another country, and I love America, and I think it's awesome. But I have to admit, one of my worst days for where things are going for the U.S. auto industry came up when it was announced by GM that GM sold their European operations, I believe, for $2 billion. And they took the money and redistributed that to shareholders. Now, the reason this was a big disappointment is that part of the core logic that GM has been using for the last 10 years is that, in essence, batteries are one of the components that are in a vehicle. So only 25% of the parts in a GM vehicle are made by the company. The rest are purchased in the open market. And so this is the case across a number of manufacturers. So GM's logic was that when you look at EVs and the batteries, over time, they're actually, GM really couldn't develop the core competencies in battery making quickly enough so that they can put out their own batteries / battery packs / cars. And so they've really been relying on LG and other Korean manufacturers to address this issue on their behalf. So they're coming up with designs and shipping those to Korea. That strategy has proven to be good. I really am disappointed and so forth for what the future is of American manufacturing, because, you know, that $2 billion, well, in essence, GM's job is to make money on a consistent basis and pay earnings to shareholders. The challenge that's popping up is that when you have $2 to $5 billion sitting around that nobody would notice if you didn't, and you threw that into a mini-scale battery factory of some sort to start to develop competencies in that space, I think that there have been people that have been mad that they had 20 cents less in earnings in their check. But I think that would have set GM up to be competitive in what we're heading to for the future. So that move on GM's part, in my mind, suggested that, again, the management team is focused on a process for management into the future that really looks backward at how the auto industry does business. There's a question mark that's hanging over the auto business right now, and that is that, is it a really bad idea for Tesla to reverse integrate into batteries, or is it a brilliant idea? Right now, the answer is it's a brilliant idea simply because they have all this built up research and implementation for it, and it's giving them a nice competitive advantage currently. The theory is in the next 5 to 10 years, it'll be determined that having a battery plant is an anvil around the neck of that company. And so the current circumstance is that we don't know what the answer to it is, but once everybody knows what the answer is, it'll be too late to fix it. So you kind of have to perhaps take both strategies. And my concern for domestic manufacturers in the United States and in other places is that they're a huge competitive disadvantage to entities that are doing investments now. And once it's determined what the winning lane is, the ability of others to catch up will basically put them out of business. And so I think this is kind of interesting. This kind of answers an interesting question that came up, which is, there's an entity called it's called Cattle, which is a Chinese battery manufacturing firm. Right now, they're one of the companies that Daimler has contracted with, and they're building a battery factory. Cattle is building a battery factory in Europe currently. And so usually we have a definite hardcore destination of where our shows are going. This one was sort of exploring where we are currently and sort of giving an exam to the process of Bob Lutz on where things are going and why, and what it means to our future, both for the auto companies that rely on the jobs, etc. So I'm looking forward to all your comments. I've seen a few of them that have rolled by. I've tried to avoid really diving into them so it wouldn't affect the flow of the show. But again, we kind of give Bob Lutz's analysis a C plus, maybe a C. And as Tesla becomes more successful, his thesis starts to head into the D, F zone. And this is why we concluded that Tesla's process is sort of destroying the core logic of a lot of these auto companies. Just a reminder, 25 leg lifts each morning. Don't go to bed within 2 hours of eating, preferably 4 hours. Please remember to like and subscribe. We really would appreciate your taking time to subscribe to our show because it makes a huge difference. Tschüss German, au revoir French, Lehitraot, Hebrew, Hoda Hafez, Farsi. Enough respect in Jamaica is what we say. Gareth, all my friends that have said hello, thank you for doing so. Look forward to our next show, an opportunity to talk. And please take time to share your comments at the end of the show again, because folks that weren't there for the live feed could actually see it. Hey, have a great day, and thank you all for saying hello during our show today. Bye for now.